Good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen from Africa, West Africa, Europe, Americas, and Asia. I would like really to welcome all of you. I am Arnold Akojenu, Senior Advisor for Africa at Kofi Annan Foundation. I am very, very privileged to have along with me four distinguished guests. And I will start with Mohamed Chambas, who I used to call the proconsul of West Africa, that brings all of you to ancient Roma, where the proconsul is the person who is in charge of the entire part of administration and political issue in Roman Empire. And Mohamed had been not only a senior official in his government of his country, Ghana, but he went on and became a very, very prominent ECOWAS head during very tough time of that sub-region in Africa. And he went on and established and worked for the Secretariat of the what we call European Union and African, Caribbean, and Pacific countries, and came back to UN when he had been leading for more than 5 years, close to 6 years, Africa, what we call UN West Africa structure, in charge of not only West Africa but Sahel, and based in Dakar. He's outgoing, returned to his homeland, and now he will be sharing with us his experience. I would like to welcome and to ask you to praise Mohamed Chambas for the dedication, his dedication and the way he has been handling all those functions and responsibility throughout more than 30 years. My second guest is Chris Fomunyoh. He's a director of NDI in charge of Africa, and Chris is a really seasoned, what I call a program design, in particular on electoral front. And he has been doing that for most of the entire continent, based in Washington. And he designed, supervised many country electoral support program. And I would like to praise him in particular for the last initiative which he embraced, is what we used to call African Statement Initiative. We will talk about that initiative, but I'm really pleased to welcome him and to be able to give him the floor in a couple of minutes. My third distinguished guest is Miss Hassan Idayat. He's based in Abuja, and you all know what Abuja represents for West Africa. And there, he's in charge of the regional think tank, working on democracy, on electoral, on governance, and all those issues. And he has a lot to share with us. I was told, and I'm pretty confident that knowing the entire region and working with a solid team, he will be sharing with us her views on what we have at stake. My last and not the least guest is Aisha Osori. I used to interact with her in many issues concerning West Africa. He's in charge of the Open Society Initiative for West Africa. And she has been dealing with not only democracy, but also good governance issue concerning that sub-region, but in particular with the key stakeholders the civil society, the electoral committee, the private sector, the security sector. There's no need to list all those statements she has been meeting. And I do believe that with this, I will call it corpus of distinguished guests, we can continue what Kofi Annan Foundation started a while ago during this pandemic process with a series of webinars talking about issue of concern. And among those issues of concern is the democratic process in West Africa, which unfortunately is in decline. You may all be aware that for a long while, ECOWAS countries, ECOWAS region, have been what some friend of mine call the bedrock of democracy in the continent. Unfortunately, over the last 3 years, we have been witnessing a range of trends, starting from what we call electoral committees, continuing with arrest of activists, arrest of journalists, killing of peaceful protesters in demonstration. All those elements are ground for concern, not only to the population, to the people coming from that region, but in particular of concern for Kofi Annan Foundation. It's why we believe that it's important this afternoon that all we bring and highlight the profile of that democratic process we have been going in West Africa. And I'm pleased to report back to all of you that those who got registered based on the information provided to me are more than 200 people, person are registered and want to follow and want to intervene, want to interact with my distinguished guests. And please feel free at any given time when I ring the bell, please free to send your question or to participate to the poll which will be running from here. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for attending this section. And in particular, thank you for taking the time to share your views with us, distinguished guest. I will start with Mohamed, if he managed to join us. Mohamed Ibn Chambas, you have the floor. Mohamed? Okay. Mohamed is supposed to give us his opening remarks before I move to my three distinguished guests. But as he's not online, let me maneuver differently, and I will take for myself the green light to bring him on board anytime as of now. The way I will proceed, as Mohamed is not on board at this moment, I will start with a question. I will raise a question, and other panelists feel free to complement or to react to what the person I will be dealing with will be providing to all of us. Let me start with Chris Fomunyoh. Chris, are you on board? I'm seeing you 525. Thank you. My candid question is related to the title of this webinar. what can be done to arrest the authoritarian drift West Africa countries are going through? And who do you believe can handle this matter, not only at country level, but at the regional level? You have the floor, Chris, and thank you again for accepting to be part of this webinar. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Anor, for those very kind words of introduction. I also want to thank the Kofi Annan Foundation for providing us with this platform to brainstorm and rub minds on a burning topic that's being discussed across the entire continent, and especially in the sub-region of West Africa, because civil society organizations, academics, thought leaders, political party leaders are wondering to themselves, and even ordinary citizens are wondering to themselves, what happened to the hopes, the high expectations that West Africans had with regards to their democracy, especially after the transitions that we've seen in the third wave, or what is generally been discussed as the third wave of democratization beginning in the early 1990s. Let me also say what a distinguished honor it is, a distinct honor it is for me to be co-panelist with our brother and very distinguished diplomat, Mohamed Chambas, Ibn Chambas, when he joins us, as well as my two sisters, Aisha and Idayat, who are really thought leaders, not just because they lead big, important organizations, but also because they're putting their lives on the line on a daily basis to defend and protect democracy and democratic values. I dove my hat off to them, and I'm really delighted to be part of this conversation. I think the place for us to start is to pose the question whether democracy is really in decline in West Africa. And I will respond in the affirmative. And I would say that for me, democracy in West Africa reached the high water mark in 2015. Because in that year, in spring of 2015, the giant of West Africa, Nigeria, had just gone through an election in which the opposition candidate won the presidency. And even before the election commission called the official results, the incumbent president picked up his phone, called his opposition to congratulate him on his victory. And for the first time in Nigerian history since independence, political power changed hands at the level of the presidency from one political party to another in a very peaceful democratic process. That was extremely uplifting, not just for the 200 million Nigerians, but for all of West Africa and all of us as Africans to see that kind of smooth transition. Shortly after the Nigerian elections, the ECOWAS foreign ministers met in Accra, Ghana in May of 2015 in an ECOWAS ministerial, during which there was a very healthy debate and discussion about the need to have a region-wide limitation of presidential mandates to 2 terms, so as to facilitate the peaceful transition of political power and to make sure that heads of states would be term limited so that presidents would not tinker with constitutions of their countries to perpetuate themselves in power. There was a ripple of hope because 13 of the 15 countries that constitute ECOWAS were all in favor of such an amendment, and the only objections or the only concerns were expressed by Togo and the Gambia. And the hope was that when the heads of states of ECOWAS met, that they would be able to ratify this decision. Unfortunately, when the heads of states met, the concerns that had been raised by just two countries invariably polluted the atmosphere in their deliberations, and they came out without taking this bold decision, which would have implanted or solidified a parameter that would have helped West Africa consolidate its democratic processes. At the time in 2015, even international organizations such as Freedom House that conduct an annual rating of democratic systems across the world rated that agreed that of ECOWAS's 15 countries, 6 countries were considered free, and the rest were either partially free or not free. Unfortunately, we saw that from 2015, 2 years later, the 6 countries dropped to 4. And 2 years after that, when we look at the ratings of 2020, the 4 have now dropped to 2. So internationally around the world, when people look at West Africa today, they're pleased that only Ghana and Cape Verde are the 2 countries that are considered totally free. The rest of our countries are struggling in terms of consolidating their democratic gains of the last 2 or 3 decades. I would quickly then ask myself, why is there this decline? And obviously, as happens with every political development, there are both internal or domestic reasons as well as external factors. But rather than go through a long list of factors, I would zero in on 2. And in my opening remarks, state something which I can elaborate later when we get into the questions and answers, but state that for me, the 2 reasons for this decline are: 1, the dereliction of duty by political leaders and political elites who are coming up short on the expectations of citizens, and 2, the complacency, or even in some cases, the complicity of other actors that should be serving to safeguard and protect democracy for the benefit of citizens. And along those lines, I'm thinking not only of heads of states that tinker with the constitutions of their countries, that redefine the rules of engagements in ways that shrink political space. I'm also thinking about legislators that no longer conduct their oversight responsibilities to exercise the checks and balances that we should see in every democratic society, and members of the judiciary who have allowed courts of law to be transformed into instruments of political advantage and no longer serve as the chambers of social justice that citizens initially expect of them. And I'm also thinking of the heads of security services that allow themselves to be instrumentalized for political gain. Despite these concerns, and I will conclude with this, I still remain optimistic for West Africa. And my optimism draws from the vibrancy of civil society in the sub-region. The fact that we see that civil society has not lost hope, that civil society is as outspoken as ever, and that civil society in West Africa particularly, unlike what we see in other parts of the continent, doesn't shy away or doesn't allow itself to be boxed into national considerations, but that civil society across West Africa is ready to speak out when issues happen even outside the realm of their national boundaries. That's why we see civic leaders from Senegal speaking out with regards to political developments in Benin or in Guinea-Conakry. We see civic leaders from Burkina Faso speaking to issues happening in Togo or in Ghana. And it's that vibrancy of civil society in West Africa that gives me hope that all is not lost. I am also delighted to see that citizens as a whole are coming to the recognition that collectively we have to continue to work hard to safeguard our democracy and cannot take it for granted. So with those opening remarks, I will be ready to engage in the questions and answers when we get to that point. But thank you very much for your time and attention and for this wonderful opportunity to be part of this panel.
Maybe Miss Hassan and Miss Osori, you want to add something in order to help us to understand why we are attending those trends in West Africa. Miss Hassan, please. Miss Hassan?
Yeah.
Yes. Do you want to add? Yes, please.
Yes, please. Yes, please. Yes, please. I think importantly, the positives. I want to really highlight the positives, which I think that will go a long way to make a difference in terms of a re-energized democracy for West Africa. And one is the demography in terms of the young people. The huge youth demography, I imagine, and a very big tech community, which we've not just seen with MSAS in Nigeria, but also with the Free Senegal and across all the capital city. Social media itself has actually improved accountability. And lastly, with what happened during the COVID period, or with Guinea Conakry and Cote d'Ivoire and Mali, these three countries have also given us an opportunity to re-energize solidarity to the way it used to be. So with this positive, I think that gradually things will continue to grow. It will reach an head, but definitely it will become better in the region.
Mohamed, give me 2 additional minutes. Allow me to get complete first trend of response to my first question, and then I will come back to you and I'll let you share with us your opening remark. Aisha, have you anything to add to what Chris and Idayat just shared with us?
Yes, thank you. And let me just at least take this opportunity to also say thank you to CAF for organizing this well-timed conversation around democracy in West Africa. I'd like to pick up a little bit on where Idayat ended before I move on to a little bit about what Chris started with. So just in terms of positives, I'd say that there's also the fact that we're seeing a lot more, in addition, solidarity, not just among civil society actors who are, as have been pointed out, working across borders, understanding that when Mali goes down, there's repercussions to several countries, when Burkina is under threat, and on and on and on. So we're seeing a lot of more cross-border participation, organizing by civil society, and we saw that around Guinea as well, Mali, as have been mentioned. But in addition to civil society, we're also seeing citizens themselves picking up on trends. So Idayat mentioned NSAS, and we saw that NSAS trended really globally and also across Africa, triggering other people in other parts of Africa, not just West Africa, picking up on the police brutality and sharing their stories. Likewise, when Free Senegal was trending, we saw many people in Nigeria and Ghana picking up on that. So we're also seeing that in addition to civil society waking up or building on solidarity, we're seeing citizens themselves across Africa also understanding that we have many common challenges and many common opportunities. That said, when we talk about the situation with democracy today, part of my sense is that two things briefly. We can speak more when I have a chance to talk in more detail. One is that I think democracy is suffering from too great expectations. We're overburdening democracy with expectations that maybe democracy was not designed for. Many of us, we have to examine why people are losing hope. Even though Afrobarometer would tell us that many people still see democracy as the best form of governance, we're also seeing that people are getting more jaded, more apathetic, there's higher voter turnout. So what's the reason why? It's typically because people are not seeing the dividends of democracy. So maybe we need to be more clear about really what the role of democracy is in a society so that it's not overburdened. And then the second thing I want to say is, are we really practicing democracy? So yes, it's all well and good that West Africa by 2015, totally agreed, we were seen as the beacon of of democracy in the continent, well earned. But we must ask ourselves, are we really practicing democracy when it comes to things like the independence of our institutions, independence of our electoral monitoring bodies, the role that voter registration plays in predetermining elections, the role of constitutional reform, and on and on and on. When we examine those things, we'll find that in many of our countries, we're not really, and we haven't really been practicing democracy in the way that we should, which is also a good thing, because it means that when we do, then we will see a huge uptick, and that's also an opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aisha. Let me now turn and welcome Dr. Mohamed Ibn Chambas. To Mohamed, we were told that you went through some technical problem. Even the best country, the best country in that can happen in West Africa. I really want to welcome you and to give you the floor to share your views on the subject we have at stake right now. Thank you very, very much. And when you were not on board, I took time to refer to your experience, your professional experience and what you went through. I will not repeat that, but all those who are listening to you, they know who you are, who you have been, what you have been handling over the last 30 years. And once again, let me take this opportunity to commend you for what you achieved for West Africa in particular, but for UN in general. Mohamed, you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much. And once again, apologies for the technical hitch that caused me to join this meeting rather late. I should have been introducing, but let me set off by congratulating the Kofi Annan Foundation, as I'm sure other panelists have done, and to say that this meeting you have convened, this forum is very timely. And you, Arnold, thank you for moderating it. Actually, CAF could not have put together a stronger panel in Chris, Fomunyoh, Idayat, and Aisha. Sorry. And in that regard, let me say that this conversation is topical, and I only recall that sometime in 2018, when I was still heading UNOWAS, that we convened a meeting in Abidjan on constitutional reforms that were unfolding in the sub-region, and the question of the state of democracy was very much in the fore in these discussions, namely whether the ongoing reforms were consensual enough, whether they were designed to strengthen democratic governance, or on the contrary, that some of them may in fact have been weakening democratic governance as a whole. And then it was generally agreed that this was a discussion that had to be broadened to bring in many more stakeholders. And in that regard, OSIWA did also convene this forum on the state of democracy, to which ECOWAS and other regional partners participated, including, of course, civil society, a number of research think tanks. So KF is keeping this discussion alive, and that is very, very important. I know Chris himself, when he was in Accra in December, we did consult and we did say that during this year, we should create more fora. And so I'm glad that all of this is going to be leading in December to further discussions along the side of ECOWAS meetings, and we hope that ECOWAS will be playing a very lead role in this discussion, because after all, this year is the 20th anniversary of the Protocol on Democracy and Good Governance, and so perhaps after 20 years of practice, it is the moment to step back and then review what good practices have been achieved, and where the lacuna are, where the gaps are, where it is that we all could still work harder to improve on democracy. And it's probably already been mentioned in the discussion so far that the Mo Ibrahim report for 2020, again, interrogating the issue of democracy and wondering whether democracy is on retreat in Africa. I think this is very consistent with these discussions that we are going on. And according to Freedom House report, Benin, Burkina Faso, Guinea, Mali, and Nigeria have seen the most significant declines in their democratic standing in all of West Africa. This is based on the studies that they have done. And of course, during the 2020 elections in 7 countries, we saw varying degrees of tension over the inclusivity of electoral processes, electoral management bodies, and the accuracy of voter registers, among other contentious issues. In some cases, electoral preparations were accompanied by complaints by opposition about the instrumentalization of judiciary and COVID-19 emergency measures to restrict the ability of opposition to be able to send their message to the voting population. And the controversial constitutional changes in Guinea, in Cote d'Ivoire, that allowed incumbents to stand for elections. All of this heightened tensions, and we saw unacceptable levels of election-related deaths in these 2 countries in particular. And the most worrying development, of course, we all know, has been the coup d'etat in Mali. And I think that all relevant parties need to be commended for their efforts to ensure transition towards civilian-led government in Mali. I think here, ECOWAS needs to be singled out for its correct position in this, enforcing the zero tolerance policy or principle and policy against coup d'etat, which has been enforced in the case of Mali, and which is the standard in West Africa. So if other regions have problems with that now, as we see with the Central Africa region and in Chad, at least ECOWAS has maintained this, which is important if we are not to slip back again to the paths of frequent interventions of military in politics in West Africa, a path which I think the peoples of West Africa want to put behind so that we can move forward in consolidating democratic governance in this sub-region. Increased insecurity rather, due to violent extremism has also disrupted the process of democratic consolidation, and we saw that even it threatened the holding of credible elections in Burkina Faso in Niger, where violent extremists attack civilians. And of course, this has also been the case in Mali. So insecurity is one of the factors that, of course, often plays into hands of incumbents, and then, of course, an over-militarization of local context can erode possibilities there of democratic governance. Human rights trends have been worrying. We've seen acts of impunity during episodes of political and electoral campaigning and violence, carrying grave implications for the protection of civilians and the respect of human rights in West Africa. And violators of the law, of course, need to be held accountable no matter who they are. And we've seen impunity, even in countries which in the past had not been associated with electoral violence. And the way to stamp it out is to ensure that impunity is not tolerated and the rule of law enforced without fear or favor. Of great concern are human rights abuses against political opponents and journalists, with reports of arbitrary arrests, intimidation, and unlawful detention, particularly during periods of heightened political activities. We have seen this across the region. That is something that we all need to stand up against. Elections in various countries have also witnessed hate speech. Condemned, and we were in particular very, very clear about that. And I think hate speech is something that has been on the rise, unfortunately, and we need to work against that. Increased displacement due to insecurity has resulted in the exclusion of displaced communities from the electoral process in some of the countries, although particularly in Burkina Faso and Niger, very determined efforts were made to ensure that displaced persons were able to vote. It's usually easier with the presidential elections, where there was a genuine challenge was in their ability to vote for their representatives, since they were in most of these cases displaced from their constituency, from their areas of origin, and so the means were not always there to ensure that they could effectively select their representatives to national assemblies, and there was a problem. There have as well been allegations of human rights violations by security forces and civilian volunteer groups in counterterrorism operations, including extrajudicial killings. We have seen some reports that have been worrying, both in Burkina Faso and in Niger, and I know that the authorities there have been working in a very determined way to address these concerns and to ensure minimal collateral casualties in the fight against terrorism and violent extremism, because that otherwise can drive the population into the hands of terrorist groups. On gender, let me say that there's been some progress in participation and representation of women in political and peace processes, with Togo electing its first prime minister, and Burkina Faso, Ghana, and Guinea having several female presidential candidates. These advancements are to be commended, but a lot still needs to be done. I must say that there have been gender parity laws which have also been passed, but the implementation of these have actually left much to be desired, because we've seen that parties have found ways around it, so that they have not fully complied, or they have presented females more as supplementary candidates, suppléant, as they say in French, than as the primary candidates. And I think this is a tendency which one has to look up against, because we know that women are majority in our population in West Africa, without exception in all countries, and yet in very few countries do we see women representation hitting 30% in legislature and in executive. And sometimes, yes, maybe if there's good progress in the legislature, as we see in some countries, when it comes to the executive, I think there's a lot there to ensure full respect for gender and compliance with.
Okay, we are facing some connection problem, as you realize. Let me try, while you are going through a process, you all realize that there is a poll, and feel free to reply, and just to flag those elements, the elements in that poll. Do you believe that there is a real decline of democracy in your country? Are you very concerned by that? Slightly concerned? Not concerned at all? Or you have no opinion? While you are going through this, allow me to highlight some points which have been brought to our attention by the panelists from the first question, and then after that, I will move to the second one. First, many reasons have been found why we are attending this backsliding of democracy in West Africa. The first point is the dereliction of duty completed by the complicity of a range of actors. Those points came from Chris Fomunyoh. I would like to add to that the one flagged later on by Aisha. There is no dividend. People are not finding any dividend in this democratic process the country have been engaged in. But along with those 2 or 3 points, one can add the security issue, which have been unfortunately progressively affecting some of the key countries in that region. And the pandemic environment have been used to go beyond the minimum which have been seen while dealing with human rights issue, by dealing with rule of law, with the change of the institution, change of the constitution here and there. But despite all those elements which I just highlight, there is the room for hope. And many of the panelists, they flag those rooms, pieces of home for hope here and there. The first one is related to the vibrancy of the civil society. We can add to that what came later on from Ida, which is the youth in particular, and the social media component, which they are making more and more prominent in their interaction with the government, with the interaction with the elite. The gender issue came also, and although there are some progress here and there, we have to ask ourselves why a region like the West African region, we managed to have one leader as the president. Is not doing more than that, but I will come to that. later. In the meantime, let me now move to the current environment we are going through, the pandemic. And then my question will go straight to Idayat Hassan. And Idayat, has the COVID-19 pandemic play a role in democracy retreat in West Africa? Because that have been used. You may wish to flag some point. We can explain or justify that kind of statement. You have the floor, Idayat. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think importantly, West Africa's experience with the coronavirus is being complicated. You see at the beginning the positive steps, such as the lockdown of the major cities by March, closure of international airports, and even the awareness process became overshadowed by massive human rights abuses and poor relief packages to the citizens. It's a mixed bag again, because health-wise, the region really fared better in the low number of deaths and infection rates. This is in spite of even the challenge or often touted reason that because we have poor public infrastructure for recording deaths, as well as the stigma associated with the virus in many communities. But importantly is that it didn't impact us the way we expected it to be. And if you compare to other parts of the world, you will feel we should actually be happier, because with Europe, I think 9 times greater the deaths itself, the death record. So I think it's really a lot of positive. But the most important part, which became very, very prominent in form of the way and manner it's been able to lead to democratic decline, is actually the negative side. And I think for me, I've actually identified 3 very important themes to discuss this around. One is the undermining of constitutionalism and rule of law across the region. The first thing that happened was the introduction of emergency laws and the strict implementation of these laws in most of the countries in ways that were not actually proportional to the crisis at hand. Ghana is a very good example of this, especially when you look at the fact that Ghana had an emergency law, but went ahead to introduce what they call the Restriction Act, with no end date, in a country where we already argue has an existing law, and even in a very few weeks are not supported by opposition. Again, is also the way that it was able to undermine that principles of checks and balances that defines democracy itself. The executive was able to assume so much power such that the court and the legislature disappeared, not only by the invoking emergency law, but because they could not even in the first phase get their hearts together to sit during this lockdown period. Now, again, are examples of countries like Guinea, where we saw how Fakonde pushed through a new a referendum, a new constitution, a parliamentary election, and even his own presidential election to consolidate hold on power during this pandemic. All over, when it comes to the rule of law and constitutionalism, what we saw is that majority of the ECOWAS state parties actually violated the ECOWAS Supplementary Protocol on Democracy and Good Governance, and even the African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance, which are 2 very principal acts which we try to uphold in the region. Secondly, is the issue of elections, which Ambassador Dr. Chambas have already raised. Free, fair, and representative elections are the core tenets of democracy itself. And when Aisha said, are we really practicing democracy? One thing that came out strongly with this pandemic is it was really instrumentalized to actually undermine this preset of elections itself. Already from 2019 until date, out of the 15 member states, I think roughly than not, we had 10 contested elections in the region, from even the almighty Ghana that we talk about, Guinea-Bissau, Benin, Nigeria, Togo, Mali, Niger, Senegal, and Cote d'Ivoire. All the elections were contentious and disputed. In fact, in October 2020, we called it an October of fire, with so much fear for us in the region, considering what happened with Mali in August, again, aside the other challenges that led to October in Cote d'Ivoire and in Guinea, Conakry. However, so a lot of trends then came up within these elections itself. The postponement of elections in Gambia, Liberia, and Nigeria, where legislative and off-cycle elections, such as the governorship one, was postponed in Nigeria. The enfranchisement of voters, which goes to the root of what we call election, participatory democracy itself, with either no voter registration, continuous voter registration in Nigeria as an example, conducted poor voter registration, or difficulty to actually acquire the card, as witnessed with opposition and as supporters in Cote d'Ivoire. Then stifling opposition, invoking the COVID protocols across the region. These political parties stifled opposition gathering, using rules of social distances as excuses. And in some way, this actually lowered voter turnout itself, because we are talking about registrations already onerous, democracy not delivering dividends, and the lack of trust in the state. Overall, the quality of election depreciated in the region, and nothing tells us this more than Mali again, where we saw what the disputed elections eventually led to, because we can't take it away as a contributing factor to the ongoing transition in Mali. Importantly to us, again, is this restrictive civic space and violation of human rights. In a region where the pandemic has already impacted citizens' livelihood and finances, and there were no paychecks, there are no financial bailouts. In fact, in countries where they introduced this, corruption came up, which is again a challenge contributing to democratic decline in the region. The strict lockdown was incredibly detrimental to the poor, but most important was the attack on civil liberties. From Nigeria to Ghana, Sierra Leone, Guinea, citizens were clamped down on. Journalists were harassed. Even women were beaten for not wearing face masks or raped. In fact, during the lockdown period in Nigeria, we said that at a time where the COVID-19 pandemic itself had killed only 12 people, the security forces, with their heavy-handed approach, had killed 18. Compare and contrast to the numbers COVID took during that period. The right to protest was, of course, taken away, and that represents a positive in terms of our also organizing to re-energize solidarity in the region. And this started first with Niger Republic, where our colleagues who had already received a permit to protest were all of a sudden clamped upon, like 12 of them taken away to prison, and some, I think they were even casualty, like 2 people eventually died. From Nigeria to Guinea, Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, everywhere, it became the norm. EndSARS, the story is still ongoing in Nigeria with the people that were killed, assaulted. But in the same instances, we saw governments who are actually preventing us from protesting, having large gatherings, irrespective of the so-called COVID protocol they have actually introduced. And I think this is actually detrimental in the sense that flagrant human rights violations are no longer a norm, are no longer an exception in West Africa. It has fast become a norm. The tenets of democracy are no longer what we can start benchmarking the way we used to love benchmarking at first. And we will say that, oh, we have 3 stable democracy in West Africa: Ghana, Benin, and Cape Verde. Not only did we lose Benin, but even Ghana is flailing as colleagues keep putting us on notice. But what is the most worrying, and I think that's my concluding sentence,
Thank you.
really exemplifies what decline means, is the decline in Benin, which actually eroded what is called the third wave of democracy not just in West Africa, but in Africa when it conveyed the Constitutional Conference in the early 90s. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Idayat. Thank you. Before I kindly ask Dr. Chambas his concluding remark, because he didn't get time to come to that, allow me just to remind all of you, here I'm talking about our participants or attendees, that a second poll is open. Mohamed, please share your concluding remark, and after that I will try to summarize what Ms. Hassan just shared with us. Thank you. Mohamed?
Yes, actually, just to come back to a point that I had raised earlier, I think this conversation is so important, it's so crucial, that this year being the 20th anniversary of the ECOWAS Protocol on Democracy and Governance, it needs to be taken forward, it needs to be broadened, and I think we should be working, as I said before, very closely with ECOWAS. After all, this is an ECOWAS document that has been held very high, and ECOWAS has rightfully gotten a lot of kudos for this protocol and the good work that it has done in the sub-region. So if there are legitimate questions about the retreat of democracy, then let us create that platform and let's have a very frank discussion to see what can be done to arrest this retreat, which we should not underplay. The second factor, again, is the issue of the democracy dividend. And I think this is where COVID-19 has been disastrous in exacerbating triggers of conflict, poverty, exclusion, even corruption associated with COVID recovery plans, etc. And this also, as we know, when the population begin to wonder where the dividends are, that also undermines the entrenchment of democracy in the sub-region. So I think as we engage in this conversation, we need also to take into account the need to continually also ensure that the economic, socioeconomic conditions of the population are addressed to give the population more interest in how they are governed, so that they will become active participants and citizens in their respective countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mohamed. Thank you. Thank you for your concluding point. Now I will move on to what I consider to a very critical point. And that point is I'm sure that Aisha will help me to address it. Is why does democracy backsliding matter? Aisha, what is your reading? Is it only related to peace? Is it related to stability? Or is it related to development? What will be your say in that particular point, Aisha? You have the floor.
Well, thank you, Arno, for that question. It's actually a very good one, because sometimes you get the sense that maybe we're not too clear in our minds the importance of democracy beyond elections. But before I even start on that, just want to say thank you very much to Mr. Even Chambas and to Idayat and Chris as well for setting the tone for this important question. Why does it matter? And I think you've picked on it already. It matters. I think the main reason is for governance and accountability. We have had a long history in Africa, at least, and West Africa, of having military rules. In fact, there was a time when most of our countries, between 1961 and 1997, for example, where the only way to transfer power was through the barrel of a gun, with over 70 coups d'etats. So we've lived under authoritarian rule. And some of our countries still live under authoritarian rule. And when you look at human development indices alone, without even looking at things like the Freedom Index, let's just look at the basics, just human development indices, you find that in many of these countries where we've had a long history of violence, authoritarian, military type governance or government, you find that we're very low in terms of health, investment in health, education, we're very low in terms of infrastructure. Meanwhile, on the converse, we're very high on things like state capture, corruption. So there is a link between governments, people who are ruling and are not accountable to anybody. And typically, democracy, real democracy, allows for a system, a process by which when people don't meet their promises, when they're not delivering on the things that they promised to do, when the lives of people are not getting better, there is a process for voting them out, which speaks to the increasing frustration and voter apathy that we're witnessing, because people are saying that, okay, now we seem to be quite good at still not making any difference. And that speaks to the quality of our elections and the quality of our democracy. So I think that's the very first and most important thing, actually, that it matters because we will see a return to authoritarian rule, as we're seeing in a place like Mali, as we're seeing in places like Benin Republic, that there are implications for development and security, as mentioned when I mentioned the human development indices. Now let's look at insecurity. In the Sahel, if you look at the main countries that make up the G5, you also find that when you look at the human development indices for these countries, Niger, Chad, they're one of the worst in the world on every level. Education, what's the other word? How long longevity, how long people live. And then you find that one of the reasons for the insecurity in the first place is a sense that many parts of our countries are not governed properly. So we have this issue of poor governance or even lack of governance. And so you find that these are areas that are ripe, so to speak, for dissidents to grow, for insurgency to grow and nourish, and for terrorists who have a different ideology from the rest of us who want a more vibrant, pluralistic, inclusive society to come and bring a different brand. And what are they giving in return? You find that in many parts, let me use Nigeria, where I'm very familiar with, you find that in many parts of Nigeria, and I'd say even Mali, when the jihadists take over certain parts of the country, they bring governance, in quotes, the governance that our elected representatives or our authoritarian governments seem unable to provide. They tax people, they provide security for people who want to travel, they provide justice. All those things are missing. Instead, what we see is that in many of our countries, you have a very bloated government, very expensive government. You find lots of perks, and you find that the people in government are typically the richest people in the country. So that's where the state capture comes in. The second reason why democracy backsliding matters is because we are more interconnected. The whole world is more interconnected. And that, on the flip side, is one of the reasons for the dissatisfaction with some countries in the West with globalization and the fact that they're understanding that the world is more interconnected than it was, and it's really hard to disconnect ourselves. But this interconnectedness means that when one country becomes more authoritarian, when it limits the freedoms of its citizens, it typically has an impact on other countries. So that's another reason why democracy backsliding matters. The third reason is because many of our societies, whether it's in the so-called West, where right now migration is like one of the biggest fears for the European countries, is that our communities are becoming more diverse. Our respect, understanding, our appreciation for diversity, for minorities, all that is like it's like the genie's out of the bottle. And what happens when we lose democracy, when we lose the protections for plurality and representation and participation, is that it now limits our opportunities to protect diverse communities, minorities, and things like that. And then the last for me on why it's important to guard against democracy backsliding is that we have already lived under authoritarian rule. Many of our countries have faced living under brutal regimes. Some of us, as I've mentioned, are still living there, and the signs of that, the impacts of those types of regimes are still very much part of what we're dealing with, and that's why I mentioned in the beginning that let's even question how well and truly we're practicing democracy, because in many of our countries, what we're really practicing is just frequent elections, civil rule, so to speak. So it's not military rule directly, but when you look at the quality of the elections, when you look at the link, the social contract between the citizens and those who are in office, you have to wonder if votes really count. How is it possible for these people to behave the way they do, to renege on promises, election promises, to be completely unempathetic about the plight of their citizens? So for me, those are around 4 of the reasons why it's important to guard against democracy backsliding. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Aisha. Let me expand or extend and to be a bit more precise. And that will be related to what I call the ECOWAS Regional Action Plan to implement the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women and peace and security. So far, and Mohamed related to that, Mohamed Ibn Chambas related to that when he was talking about the gender. To what extent you can qualify the work or the achievements so far reached by ECOWAS country in that particular portfolio? To what extent they have been doing their best, or they can do more than that, but they are doing their best? What still needs to be done in order to ensure effective gender parity in political decision making at the national, at the regional, at the local level? Aisha, what are your views on that?
Well, thank you. Well, I mean, my views are sort of mixed. I would say that, this is not just West Africa. I think it's also in many parts of Africa. We find that we're very good at putting together frameworks and guidelines. I mean, we have the AU, DEG, Democracy, Elections and Governance Protocols, but how many countries follow those? And likewise, ECOWAS. So we have these things on paper. We spend a lot of time. I think what's really missing is the spirit of democracy, the spirit of understanding why it's important for people to participate, the value that diversity brings. All those things are important. Why has it been impossible to see more women, despite different elements of affirmative action, not just in West Africa, but also I would say in East Africa, for example, Uganda, Kenya, Rwanda remains an outlier, is that by and large, being in government, and this is what speaks to why we need to sort of discuss what we want from democracy, reimagine it. Maybe the time has come to sort of re-examine what democracy is important for and what it can do compared to what we think it can do. But I would say that, as I said, the first problem I think we have beyond having frameworks is that being in government, by and large, is about power holding. It's about access to resources. And again, the story of corruption, the story of state capture is very perverse from west to north to southern Africa. We're watching Zuma in court for all his dealings when he was president. So that sense that being in power, being in politics is the fastest route to capture state resources, I would say is one of women's biggest challenges, because in patriarchal societies, which many of our societies are, in fact, all our societies are, then men are the hunters. They are the ones who deserve to be in those positions where power can be amassed, where access to resources is guaranteed. So that's one of the biggest challenges that women are having. The second I would say is that in many of our countries, we're not practicing again, speaking to the opportunities to redesigning democracy, we're not using the right electoral processes. Many of our countries still practice first past the post. We don't have proportional representation. Again, that makes it really difficult to have a diverse number of people. We found that in countries that have proportional representation, you find that more women, more young people, again, more minorities, more people with disabilities, people more representative of the country or communities are able to be voted in. So it still comes back to our electoral laws, our constitutional laws, and our ethos, which goes back to the primordial instincts of, and I don't want to say Africans, but it does seem like as if for now we're still stuck in this rut where we see being in government as the opportunity to acquire, to amass for ourselves as individuals. That for me, honestly, still remains the biggest challenge. And until we change that mind shift so that being in government is about service, which you'd like to think is what Mo Ibrahim's prize is about. You know, he's trying to say, look, he's trying to dangle a carrot in front of African leaders and say, you know, you don't have to, and $5 million for me, $5 million seems generous, I guess, where I'm sitting. But we found that many years, nobody can get that prize because most African dictators or most people in government can already amass that money and even more, so they don't need it. So we still need to look at those things. How do we close the gaps in terms of leakages and people being able to loot their countries? All those things matter to getting more women in. And then there's just culture, religion, division, and just the sense of women's place in societies. Again, only education can change that. Thank you.
Thank you, Aisha. Maybe Idayat, you want to add or to supplement what has been said by Aisha, please?
Yes, please. Thank you very much. I think just like Dr. Chambas, I'm always very proud of ECOWAS. And in fact, just over 2 weeks ago, the WPS guideline for women in peace and security was launched by ECOWAS Department of Political Affairs, which is very good as it gives us indicators to monitor participation in peacekeeping, in peace and peacekeeping. And it's very important to say that for ECOWAS as a sub-regional, regional economic community, they've made adequate measures that can actually improve women's representation in politics. The revised 2015 ECOWAS conflict prevention framework, the revised supplementary protocol on democracy and good governance, which we've cited severally here, and even equal representation of men and women guide, all with their guidelines accompanying it, are quite instructive on affirmative action. In fact, it's even interesting that their provisions are such that asks for women to be mainstreamed into election observation, both long-term and short-term. Affirmative action is there, but while these are significant milestones, it does not translate into reality at the state level, even though there are state parties such as Senegal, Burkina, Togo, and Co, who all have affirmative action rule. And nowhere would make this even so vivid for you more than even the ECOWAS parliament itself, where out of the 91 seats that is actually at stake, there are only 24 women representative. And I think we should start our parity from our own platform. And what is quite interesting also is that our very Guinea-Conakry, of course, is the only country that sent 3 female, 3 men to represent her at the parliament. Of course, Cape Verde, as usual, had 2 women representation as well as others in it. But I think that the challenges, as we've often looked at it, are not really from the normative framework. Because like I've earlier mentioned, where we are given normative framework, filling those positions became very impossible. Maybe they are not adequate representation. And again, culture, religion, money are examples, which of course Aisha has also mentioned. was something struck us for some of the work we did at the CDD in Nigeria. So we polled the population 10,000 and we polled thrice so that we can be sure within 1 year of our finding. It was quite instructive that people were saying we can vote for women, all these reasons were not put out. And when the experts, the party politics experts and all my other colleagues came together, what became so obvious is that party politics is one of the biggest challenges that is actually militating against women's political participation. And this again is then reflective of even places, countries here, state parties, where we have even the maybe 30% quota. At the end of the day, you only have 27% of it being filled, with 3% not filled, which tells us that we have to make conscious effort to ensure that the political party is very reflective. We have to take part of this discussion that we are having today to start talking again about capacity of political parties, which 5 years ago we were really talking about in West Africa and identified as a crucial challenge that we must grapple with to strengthen democracy and the consolidation of democracy itself. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I have a last question, and that question is related to the outcome of the 2 polls we went through. And the question, as you also was related to the are we in retreat in West Africa in terms of democracy? To what extent that affects your country and what needs to be done? Who can address or fix the problem we have been going through in that decline? And the outcome, and I will share the outcome of this with you right now. On the question related to are we really declining in terms of democracy in West Africa, 70% of those who participate to the poll say, yes, we are declining. On the question, who can fix it? Do you believe that your authority can fix it? 70% say no. Say no. I would like you to react on the second point, all of you, just in very briefly before I go back to the questions coming from the floor. Could you tell me why you believe that there's still a way to address this? Why you believe, indeed, you talk about hope here and there, but what is really daunting is to notice that our citizens do not believe that those who are there, they are not the right people to fix the problem. I will start with Mohamed and then followed by Chris and my 2 sisters, Idayat and Aisha. We complete the round and then we go to the floor. Mohamed, please.
Yes, we have to also acknowledge that it will take active citizens to redress whatever we are seeing as the failings in building democracy in the sub-region. Governments have their role to play. Responsible governments will appreciate that they need to do what is right in building strong democratic and accountable institutions. But for many of the reasons that have been advanced by the panelists, governments, on the other hand, need to be kept on their toes. If we go back to the period when we could say that there was impressive and remarkable progress in building democratic countries, it was because the citizens mobilized. They became, if I can put it bluntly, fed up with living under despotic rule, and they made sacrifices and fought to bring about the change that they wanted. So that is what will be required also. Let me also say that, as a matter of fact, we also need champions. We will need champions at all levels to be able to identify this simmering crisis in democracy and to talk about it. We were fortunate to have such champions in the past, and it has often been pointed out that West Africa is unique in the sense that perhaps at least 10 to 12 of the current heads of state were all in opposition before and were activists in one form or the other for change, for improvement, for democracy in their countries. So I think if today we are saying that the process is weak and is faltering, we need to see civil society and other activists work to create and identify champions who can also lead the process towards restoring democracy, if that is what is required to be done. Thank you.
Point, yeah.
The attendees also confirm some of the more scientific work that's been done by Afrobarometer and other established opinion research organizations that confirm that while Africans overall still embrace democracy and see it as the preferred method of governance, they're also very skeptical about the ability of their leaders to deliver on democracy. And I think both Aisha and Idayat addressed this very eloquently. And I think that's what's coming through in your poll. And I would agree with what Dr. Chambas just said, in the sense that the process has to be citizen-driven. And that's where our optimism lies. It has to be driven from the ground up. And most of the changes that we've seen across the sub-region in the past have been led by citizens in expressing their frustrations. Yanama in Senegal, Ballet Citoyen, Burkina Faso, other civil society organizations that have mobilized the whole civil society movement in Nigeria that was so mobilized in the late 80s, early 90s, and contributed to pushing the military back into the barracks. You know, those are the kinds of movements that we always think about. But I also agree that we need champions. This has to be a two-way process. We cannot say to the citizens that are already depressed and disaffected that it's your problem, so you alone fix it. That would be giving a blank check to the leaders who are not living up to expectations. So I think we also have to task them with being true champions of the people's expectations. Because if we look at what transpired in Benin, and Idayat referred to this with regards to Benin having launched the process of national conferences across not just West Africa, but across all of Africa, that in that process, there was the citizen-led part of it, but you cannot discount the impact of the first leaders, Kerekou and Soglo, who, because they accepted to play by the rules of the game, were willing to Kerekou to allow the national conference to take place, and then eventually when he lost the elections to accept the outcome, and Soglo when he came into power and lost the elections to also accept the outcome. And I think that those movements by those two leaders in the specific case of Benin also helped to consolidate Benin's role as a trailblazer on the democratic front in West Africa for a number of years. And that's why, even as we talk about Niger, we also can commend the fact that President Mahamadou Issoufou of Niger agreed to play by the rules. And he even got criticized by some of his peers because he accepted to respect the constitution of his country, to not seek to amend the constitution to stay in power, and through his decision was able to allow Niger to experience its first transition of power from civilian rule to civilian rule. And that's a big step which raises the bar, not just for his current peers, but also for future leaders of Niger Republic. And so we need that combination to be able to allow West Africa to regain its place of respect and stature as the trailblazer sub-region on the continent with regards to democracy and democratic governance. Thank you.
Let me now pass on the floor to Ms. Hassan, to Idayat, please.
Thank you very much. I think I align with Dr. Chambas and Chris. There are two prongs to this. One is the citizenship and one is the leadership. Now, the quality of citizenship will actually determine the quality of governance that we will enjoy in this region if we need change to happen. And that means that our work is clear-cut. We have to invest more in promoting democratic accountability. And by that is actually improving citizens' participation. We have to teach them. And another prong to that citizenship will now be the CSOs themselves. They must recognize that we are in a changing context, and they must then attend to this change in context, demography, to change their strategies to address the crisis of democracy we are currently going through. Now, the second is leadership itself. Where are the leaders? We are no longer talking about the Ofe Boyne, the Kwame Nkrumah, and co leadership, or Thomas Sankara, but even Obasanjo and Abdoulaye Wade of the last 10 years plus, even though Abdoulaye Wade attempted a totemism, which was defeated by the power of citizenry. But the quality of the leaders, even in mobilizing West Africa, let alone in their own countries, were kind of very positive and transformational, which tells you that currently we do not have leaders who have the skill set, who have the empathy, who have the vision, who have the know-how to actually adapt to changing realities. And it tells us that somehow, maybe as civil society actors, the work should actually change. Why some will be pursuing and pushing for democratic accountability, the time have actually come for us to blur the line between the civil and the political society. We should start seeing it less and less that, listen, there is no difference. The whole agenda is to serve the people, is to give the dividend of democracy to the people. So activists, those change makers, either in businesses or in the non-for-profit, must transit and join government at any level and mass. This might actually be the panacea. And currently in Nigeria, we are talking in terms of creating special seats for women. And if that's still true, every minute I ask myself, if there is an Aisha Osori, a Joy Ezelo, all those people, even an Idayat Hassan, you get one of those people in parliament, the context will not change. Definitely the context will change in the Nigerian legislature. And that tells us that we must start from somewhere and blur the link between this civil and political society and try it en masse instead of the piecemeal approach that maybe when they get there, they are captured by the structure again and not able to impactfully engage. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Aisha, the last word from you on this particular point before I share with you some comment coming from the floor. Aisha, please.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. had to come after three people who have really laid the framework. But I think there are two things that I can add. I mean, first is touching on what Idayat ended with about expanding the category and definition of civil society. I think my sense of who civil society is that it's become, in a way, and again, the flip side is the opportunity, very limited to people who are registered, who see this as their full-time job. For me, civil society is everybody who is not in government. Civil society includes the media, civil society includes all citizens, and civil society also includes the private sector, the artists, the academics. But somehow, because of the way our communities are designed, in terms of government being the biggest stakeholder in terms of employment, government being the fastest path to riches, not even just for those in government, but also for those in the private sector, we find that the lines have become really blurred, and many people see themselves as outside civil society. So I think that's an opportunity. We need to expand the notion of civil society and the role that everybody can play, faith-based organizations, everybody is part of civil society apart from government. So when we see that, we'll see more people, and we'll see less reliance on traditional civil society as we see it. The second thing that I think is an opportunity is the elite consensus that's needed. When you look at vibrant democracies, when you look at democracies that are struggling to renew themselves, and I'll use the United States as an example, you find that the elite are in the middle of that. We need African elite to be more involved as opposed to separate. They in the private sector, they in the tech world that are still largely outside the hammer of overregulation of our governments, who tend to stifle the business environment. All those are opportunities to create a new elite consensus in many of our African countries. I think that many of the times we overburden the many impoverished, and let's not forget that most of us are impoverished. Most of us are uneducated, at least in the formal sense. Most of us are unaware of what democracy is supposed to yield. And we have a vibrant elite who are sophisticated, Pan-African. Maybe that's also an opportunity where the elite come together and decide that, we need to forge a new consensus about the kind of Africa we want, the kind of countries that we want. That's missing right now. Right now, it's literally between civil society and government that sets the agenda. We need an expanded space, and we need the elite to take more responsibility.
Thank you, Aisha. Very, very, very important point. I have a range of questions coming from the floor, but luckily, I have to confess that most of them have been responded to through your point. Therefore, I will not waste your time, particularly based on the time that the time slot, we are getting close to that. But there is one question which came in particular for Mohamed in Chambas, but it's more related to his future. Some attendees really, they would like to know what you will be doing, and I don't really want to embarrass you, Mohamed. I will move to two additional questions which I can take out of what I received. The first one is related to what extent France-Afrique could be a deterrent factor in the progress West Africa country, but in particular those who are French colonialized one, they have been going through. That is the first question. And the second one is, I will not say that it's becoming more and more than academic issue, is that what is key when you talk about democracy is to have food for your family, to have funds to pay your bills, and all those all other issues are not really, they should not be factor when we are talking about democracy. What is key is the economic role. Those are the two questions I can take out from the list I received from the floor, but I leave it to you to decide who want to respond to them. Then I will move into some point in terms of conclusion. I'm thanking all of you. Who want to take those questions, the one I flagged. Mohamed, do you really want to share your future with, there are many who are concerned about your future. What are you planning to do?
Well, I think this discussion should stay on the topic of democracy.
Absolutely.
In West,
Thank you.
In West Africa.
Okay. I just want to be straightforward in terms of reporting from the floor of questions and report what have been asked. In terms of France-Afrique, anyone want to react to that? The last one is democracy versus economic growth. You have any views on that? Okay.
Well, I mean, in Ghana, we're not part of France-Afrique, so yes. Yeah. But let me just say that, well, because I mean, you know, in Ghana we've had a very proud tradition of asserting our independence and trying to build our society based on what we determine to be in our best interest. But I think, as a general observation, I would say that our partners should be a bit more circumspect in some of the actions that they take, because if we take the case of the situation in Sahel and even Lake Chad Basin today, one cannot run away from the invasion and the removal of Gaddafi in Libya, the Libyan crisis. And so, frankly, the role that France leading other partners to intervene and to trigger a crisis which we are all now grappling to deal with requires that there are lessons drawn from that also. Often we in Africa are called to face our weaknesses and to deal with them. But partners also have to take responsibility and be more circumspect in how far they intervene in African issues to the detriment of African countries and African peoples. We are all at our wits' end when it comes to dealing with Sahel and we know the root causes of it. And some have called it one of the millennial catastrophes for West Africa and Sahel.
Thank you. Anyone else? If not, I will go to what I can draw what I call my takeaway on top of the large takeaway. Yes, Chris, you have something to add? We will be short of time.
I want to take on the question about food and democracy, because that's a very important question, and as you said, it's no longer just a topic for academic discussion. Citizens verbalize some of that. So I'm pleased that the participant raised this question, and it's one that we can address head on. And I will address it in two ways. First, that we have to avoid false dichotomies. We have to avoid the impression that on other continents, people can eat and vote, but in Africa, we only want people to eat. We can eat and vote at the same time. And I believe people want to be able to feed their families, but they also want to enjoy the rights and liberties that are born rights and that citizens in other parts of the world have come to take for granted or enjoy on a daily basis. So we have to avoid putting ourselves in that kind of situation. And also remember that historically, at independence, most of our countries obtained independence as pluralistic societies. Political parties were flourishing, participating in elections. There was independent media. Parliaments were very active and represented their citizens, and democracy was functioning. And then we began to have these theories, developmental theories in the 60s that said you don't even need all of that pluralism. Just go to one party state or go to military rule because you are African, and see what that gave us for 2 or 3 decades. as Aisha very eloquently discussed earlier, it gave us a lot of authoritarian rule. It gave us a lot of human rights violations. It gave us a lot of violence and brutality in our politics. And it still didn't give us the development and the food that some people told us in the mid-60s we would get through authoritarianism. So we cannot allow ourselves to make the same mistake twice. That said, I should recognize that we have to make sure democracy delivers so that people actually see that through democratic governance, your right to access to food is determined by the good policies that make it easier for you to get food now than was the case if bad policies were in place. So it's a very relevant question, and let's continue to work to make sure that democracy delivers and we don't put ourselves in this false dichotomy of a difference between development and democracy. Thank you.
Thank you all. And I'm sorry, but I don't want to abuse of your time. Aisha unfortunately left us because we are going beyond what we planned for. But let me try to highlight some takeaway from this exchange, and to thank everyone and each one of you, and to thank all the attendees. My first point will be that the question is really a legitimate question, based on what came out from the poll and based on what you kindly share with us. Democracy, for the time being, is still far to be a gift in West Africa. We still need to fight on daily basis on that in order to bring it back. And I'm pleased that many of you were referring to where we stand a while ago, where we were a while ago, and where we are today. And what needs to be done is to start with a kind of a shared vision. It cannot work in one single country, but there is a need to consider the region as whole and to establish a shared vision on democracy. How to get there? It will depend on the range of mechanisms. Some of you talk about the need to champion the idea, to take former leader, or to find a leadership within those who are ruling the country now. Another point which came clearly is the citizenship. The quality of governance will depend on the quality of the citizenship. And related to that was the education. Education was a critical element. Many of you, all of you flagged. The civil society organization role came clearly. The point made also in relation with the elite was a critical point. So far, elite, most of them are preferring to work on economic or social activities, but they are not embracing the political way. It's important, it's becoming more and more paramount now in terms of importance to see them more and more involved in political activities. And my last point, what I call, is related to deliverable. The deliverable are key. If population are not seeing the deliverable, they will continue to believe that democracy is just a word, or it's just a way for some of those leaders or their leaders to come to power and to stay on and to stay on. What is key remain, above all, the contact, the relation between those who are called to lead and those who are led, who accept to be led. But at the same time, what is also key is that this shared vision of democracy has to start from the ground, has to start from the root, and to progressively move towards the summit. And that should include not only male but female, but all type of people, the handicap, the youth, the media, the social, what I call the traditional chief, all those elements should be part of that process. We need to seize the opportunity, and we have to seize it, the opportunity of the 20th commemoration anniversary of the protocol, additional protocol on democracy of ECOWAS, is an opportunity to bring together all the stakeholders, starting from the government side, including civil society, the private sector, the security, but also youth, media, and so on, to bring all them together to reflect on what needs to be done in order to fix the trends we have been witnessing, and what needs to be done, not only to recognize what we managed to achieve in West Africa, but what is necessarily needed to be done in order to regain where we have been or where we were a while ago. I would like, on those notes, to thank all of you, all my distinguished guests, to have accepted to share your views, to share what I call your way forward. And also I would like to thank the attendee who stay long. I know that you have a lot to do, but to find time to devote that time for this critical issue is really rewarding. I would like to thank you and to wish you all the best. Mohamed, Chris, and Idayat, I wish you a very, very good evening, and see you next time. Have a good evening and a good day in Washington, Chris. Thank you. But you may wish.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. You're welcome. You may wish to stay. Yeah, thank you, Mohamed. You may wish to stay on, but I know that from those who have been supporting me through this exercise, they are moving to something else. But anyway, we will remain in touch. And Idayat, it was a great pleasure. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, Chris and Mohamed.
Bye, Idayat. Bye, Chris.
Bye.